Translation: the Supreme Personality of Godhead acts through His material energy in the creation, maintenance, and annihilation of this cosmic manifestation, just to deliver the living entity by His compassion and stop the living entity's birth, death, and duration of materialistic life. Thus He enables the living being to return home back to Godhead. Please repeat. Could we have a little more gusto? I know it's Monday morning, but let's have a little more force, okay? The Supreme Personality of Godhead acts through His material energy in the creation, maintenance, and annihilation of this cosmic manifestation, just to deliver the living entity by His compassion and stop the living entity's birth, death, and duration of materialistic life. Thus He enables the living being to return home back to Godhead. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Materialistic men sometimes ask why God created the material world for the suffering of the living entities. The material creation is certainly meant for the suffering of the conditioned souls who are part of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as confirmed by the Lord Himself in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, verse 7. Mamaivangso jiva loke, jiva bhuta sanatanaha, manaksistan indriyani, prakritistani karshati. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. All the living entities are part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and are as good as the Lord qualitatively. But quantitatively, there's a great difference between them, for the Lord is unlimited, whereas the living entities are limited. Thus the Lord possesses unlimited potency for pleasure, and the living entities have a limited pleasure potency. Anandamayo Vyasat, the Vedanta Sutra 1.1.12. Both the Lord and the living entity, being qualitatively spirit soul, have the tendency for peaceful enjoyment. But when the part of the Supreme Personality of Godhead unfortunately wants to enjoy independently without Krishna, he is put into the material world, where he begins his life as Brahma and is gradually degraded to the status of an ant or a worm in stool. This is called Manaksastra Indriyani Prakritistani Kashati. There is a great struggle for existence because the living entity conditioned by material nature is under nature's full control. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha. Because of his limited knowledge, however, the living entity thinks he is enjoying in this material world. Manakshastra indriyani prakritistani kashati. He is actually under the full control of material nature, but still he thinks himself to be independent. Ahankara vibhuthatma katahamiti manyate. Even when he is elevated by speculative knowledge and tries to merge into the existence of Brahman, the same disease continues. Aruya krichena parampadang tata patyant yada. Bhagavatam 10.2.32. Even having attained that parang padang, having merged into the impersonal Brahman, he falls again to the material world. In this way, the conditioned soul undergoes a great struggle for existence in this material world, and therefore the Lord, out of compassion for him, appears in this material world and instructs him. Thus the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, verse 7, Yada yada hi dharmasya glani bhavati bharata abhyuthanam dharmasya tadatmanam shrijamyaham. Whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice, O descendant of Bharata, and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself. The real dharma is to surrender unto Krishna, but the rebellious living entity, instead of surrendering to Krishna, engages in adharma, in a struggle for existence to become like Krishna. Therefore, out of compassion, Krishna creates this material world to give the living entity a chance to understand his real position. Bhagavad Gita and similar Vedic literature are presented so that the living being may understand his relationship with Krishna. Vedaishcha sarvar ahang eva vedyaha. Bhagavad Gita chapter 15 verse 15. All this Vedic literature is meant to enable the human being to understand what he is, what his actual position is, and what his relationship is with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is called Brahma Jigyasa. Every conditioned soul is struggling, but human life provides the best chance for him to understand his position. Therefore, this verse says, Anugrahas tan nivrite, indicating that the false life of repeated birth and death must be stopped, and the conditioned soul should be educated. This is the purpose of the creation. The creation does not arise whimsically, as atheistic men think. Asachang apratishhtang te jagat ahu anishvaram aparaspara sambhutam kim anyat kama haitukam. They say that this world is unreal, that there is no foundation, and that there is no God in control. It is produced of sex desire and has no cause other than lust. Bhagavad Gita chapter 16 verse 8. Atheistic rascals think that there is no God and that the creation takes place by chance, just as a man and woman meet by chance and the woman becomes pregnant and gives birth to a child. Actually, however, this is not the fact. The fact is that there is a purpose for this creation, to give the conditioned soul a chance to return to his original consciousness. Krishna consciousness, and then return back home to Godhead and be completely happy in the spiritual world. In the material world, the conditioned soul is given a chance to satisfy his senses, but at the same time, he is informed by Vedic knowledge that the material world is not his actual place for happiness. Janma mrichu jara vyadi dukkha dosha nudashanam. Bhagavad Gita chapter 13 verse 9. One must stop the repetition of birth and death. Every human being, therefore, should take advantage of this creation by understanding Krishna and his relationship with Krishna, and in this way return home back to Godhead. Om Jnana Timarandasya Dinanjana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitang Jaina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyasta Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. By destiny or by mistake, I prepared class on the previous verse, which was on Friday. What I'm going to try to do is to select a theme that actually summarizes this verse and the previous one. I'll just read the two verses. This is verse 57. O King Maharaj Parikshit, but for the Lord's personal desire, there is no cause for his appearance, disappearance, or activities. As the Supersoul, he knows everything. Consequently, there is no cause that affects him, not even the results of fruitive activities. The Supreme Personality of Godhead acts through his material energy in the creation, maintenance, and annihilation of this cosmic manifestation, just to deliver the living entity by his compassion and to stop the living entity's birth, death, and duration of materialistic life. Thus he enables the living being to return home back to Godhead. I'm going to try and speak on on one of the themes that I see here, which is cause and effect. And there's another long-standing tension between free will and determinism. I might read some of this. If you think this is complicated, please note that some Year 8 students at the Avanti House School are currently studying this. It's on the curriculum, so they have little choice, to return to our theme. They're studying it for a whole term, so if you can bear with me for perhaps half an hour. What time does this class finish? Will you tell me, please? 8:30, with questions as well. Okay, I'll try and leave some time for questions and answers. I'm going to try and make this relevant. Knowledge should be relevant to us. I'm thinking of the example of Lord Chaitanya, who came down so rather than just giving didactic or theoretical knowledge, he was like the teacher who comes when the pupil is struggling and he holds the hand of the student, and the teacher is writing A, B, C, and the student's hand is also there, and he somehow thinks, I'm getting the hang of this. Think of the Lord as a teacher. In fact, here in this purport, Srila Prabhupada suggests that the whole of material existence is a kind of learning process. So the Lord comes and he helps us in that way. So imagine him as a teacher and what an exemplary teacher is. So real knowledge has to be meaningful. The rain is only useful the rainwater is useful when it hits the earth. So similarly, knowledge is only useful when it actually is relevant to our lives. So I'm going to try and speak on this. I was actually thinking, how is this relevant, cause and effect? How is it relevant, the whole issue of free will and determinism? Free will meaning we have free will. Determinism meaning, in the extreme, that actually our activities are controlled. We're trapped. Perhaps the word we use is conditioned. So what is the Gaudiya Vaishnav perspective on this, and how is this relevant to us? I thought of a few ideas. One lady devotee told me, do I try to get married, or do I wait for it to happen? Some men may also think the same. I'll leave it for you. Or is it a combination of both? Yeah. Perhaps think of other examples from your own lives. Some time ago, under considerable duress and stress, I seriously pondered the question, let me cease working, because I have to make money as well as serve. Let me cease working for a while, maybe 3 months, and see if this inevitable karma idea actually works with regards to finance. In other words, I was thinking, well, maybe I'm destined to get some finance. Well, maybe I'll just give up working then. That was my consideration. You can actually, if you want, think of the flaws in my argument. I didn't try it in the end, by the way. I didn't have enough faith that actually the money would come. But it's an interesting question. I've also noted, have you noted, you might have noted this, when something good happens to us, we go, Krishna's mercy! And then when something bad happens, we go, oh, it's Maya. Watch out for that tendency. It may all be Krishna's mercy, but we differentiate. Yes, have you noticed that? Yeah, okay. So there are many ways in which we humans search for causes. Yeah. In fact, it seems to be almost a preoccupation. One of the main preoccupations of human beings is to ask the question, why? Why did that happen? Why was that effect? What is the cause? And we use the word because, right? So cause and effect, because. In fact, even in the Gita, I think Krishna mentions somewhere, I don't know where it is, some of you know that Krishna mentions with all consideration of cause and effect with regard to the Vedic literature. So the philosophy discusses cause and effect. We have very many, you only got to look in the news, why did that crane fall down in Mecca and kill 170 people? Why are so many people migrating to Germany, and should we let them in? If you know, some of you will be more familiar with the news and so on. So, I mean, if you look just in the outside world, there's so much about why did this happen? What was the cause? But this verse gives an allusion to a more important question, perhaps. It reminds me, on Sankirtan, I remember I've occasionally noticed, this was some years ago, I think T-shirts are more prevalent now. There weren't that many around, but I noticed some interesting T-shirts. One of them said, birth, school, work, death. And I thought, that's getting close. Not bad. It's getting there. And there was another one that said, it had a picture of Garfield. Do you know Garfield? He's in a cat body at the moment. And there's a picture of him going like this, and the caption underneath is, why me? So when suffering happens, particularly, and perhaps not so much when good fortune comes our way, we ask the question, why? Why is this happening? And I think all of us must have at times asked this question with feeling, not just theoretically. Why is this happening? So this is here. This question is most important. Now, the other thing I want to mention quickly is that the exercise of free will, if it exists, is closely linked to the human virtue of responsibility, which, of course, is an important component of dharma, responsibility. In fact, the whole word responsibility means the ability to respond appropriately, responsible. Interesting. I know perhaps one or two of us think that actually as devotees we're above morality, and I won't discuss this in this class. But it's an interesting subject for discussion, and one in which I'm particularly interested. But I would like to actually look at this issue of responsibility quickly. Now, on Thursday, Malati Prabhu, Her Grace Malati Prabhu, explained how Lord Chaitanya appeared to launch the Hare Krishna movement, how Srila Prabhupada formally inaugurated the movement, and we're celebrating the 50-year anniversary, I think, next year. And she mentioned how, for those of us in disciplic session, she described it as a weight on our shoulder. We have that weight, the weight on our shoulders to take the movement forward. I mean, recently many devotees have kind of mentioned to me their perception. It seems to be a subject I'm hearing a lot, that in 40 years there will be but one or two Srila Prabhupada disciples left. And they're probably going to be 100 or more years old. So there are issues to do with how do we ensure that this Krishna consciousness movement goes forward. And if you look at any religious or spiritual organization, we'll notice they usually have some kind of challenges in taking the original teachings of the founder forward. There's always some controversy. It should be like this, and we'll allude to that later. But it's interesting. By the way, I don't want to paint too negative a picture of Dharma, this weight on our shoulders. Actually, Dharma is an interesting concept and doesn't quite equate to the British word duty, which sometimes has a bit of an idea it's pretty tough. Dharma actually means, particularly when we use the word swadharma, is that which we really like to do. Very important for us to know our nature, our swadharma. What is it that actually turns us on, comes to mind. What is it that makes us excited in life, our dharma? For example, we know that the Kshatriyas on the battlefield, if you read the Mahabharata, as they're drawing the bow, they're smiling. Yeah? I mean, you have to really be a Kshatriya to be able to smile and really enjoy yourself when you're on the battlefield. And you sometimes see devotees on book distribution. They're also smiling. You wonder, what's going on here? Right? There's some dharma, a very important concept. I'm not going to get into any detail, but I'd like to look at this ability to respond. And particularly, it's interesting in the Bhagavad Gita. This responsibility that we have is mentioned, or there's an allusion to this when Krishna says in chapter 2, verse 14, Matra spashas tu kunteya shitushna sukadukadaha agamapa nityas tungstitikshvasva bharataha. Krishna is explaining one should tolerate, as you all know, the dualities, summer and winter. What is the translation? Can you give me the translation? Who knows the translation? Matra spashas. Yes. The appearance and disappearance of happiness and distress are like the summer and winter seasons. Yeah? They arise out of sense perception only, no sign of bharata, and one must learn to tolerate them. Yeah? So happiness and distress. It's kind of appropriate because we often in England talk about the weather, whether it's a good day and therefore we're happy. So it's relevant. But I'm going to read from the purport. The two different names of address given to Arjuna are also significant. To address him as Kaunteya signifies his great blood relations from his mother's side, O son of Kunti. And to address him as Bharata signifies his greatness from his father's side. So these forms of address are used deliberately. I don't think Krishna put them in there just because there wasn't enough words in the line, in the Sanskrit line. They're there for a purpose. They're significant. Everything Krishna does is significant. From both sides, he is supposed to have a great heritage. A great heritage brings responsibility in the matter of proper discharge of duties. Therefore, he cannot avoid fighting. So many of us in this life, we have heritages. Even sometimes if we have a material heritage, and Lord Chaitanya has explained this by saying that those who come from the land of Bharat have a responsibility to preach Krishna consciousness. Even in the mind of some UK politicians, there is the idea that to govern is to serve, that it's a responsibility. We may be somewhat cynical or skeptical of the intentions of politicians, but still in the British psyche there is some kind of idea that, as I think it was Edward Heath, the Prime Minister, said, to govern is to serve. Right? There is a responsibility there. So often we may take pride in our heritage. We may even preach on the basis of it. that this is we belong to the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, and so on. We may glorify that. There is some benefits, but there are some privileges, but there's also some responsibilities that come by being part of a spiritual master. Of course, there is a case for saying that actually this responsibility is a privilege, actually. It is the mercy of the spiritual master, Guru Mukha Padma Vakya. I think there's a story where some Indian gentleman on a train approached Srila Prabhupada and said, "Please give us your mercy." And Srila Prabhupada pointed to his disciples and said, "This is my mercy." Is that right? Or my instructions? Do you want to clarify for me, Prabhu? Yeah. Yes. And what did he say? This is my blessing, take sannyas. Okay. So those instructions are really the mercy. Generally speaking, there's an idea that mercy means God smiles at us and all the difficulties go. There is some meaning to that, of course. But also the mercy is really found in those instructions of the spiritual master. So really we're looking at the subject, free will, and what agency we have, what exercise of free will, and determinism. It's a much debated subject in philosophy. Are we free? When we take a decision, how do we know we've made that decision rather than the material energy dictating it for us? Is it in my genes? Was it the position of Saturn over my moon that made me do it? If I wear an emerald and fast on Saturdays, will I be okay? Perhaps if I clap my hands 3 times before the deities, all my karma will go. Give it a go, why not? And another question I thought is, how do we deal with those things that we regret in our lives? I think all of us, or I speak for myself, there's certain things I've done I regret. How do I deal with that? Do I then say it was my fault, mea culpa, or do I blame circumstances? And when we're dealing with someone else, do we put the onus on them, or is there some degree that the circumstances are contributing to that? Difficult sometimes, isn't it, actually, to know how much. There are 2 main responses to this question. Do we exercise free will, or are our actions determined? There seem to be 2 extreme answers. The first are those who advocate that we can do whatever we want. We do have free will. Consider some of the human potential people who may not be totally wrong. Live the life of your dreams. Just believe and you can do it. You can move mountains. But there may not be a festival named after you, but you can move mountains. The kind of we can do it approach, as if we can do anything. Of course, some of us are laughing, but is it true? I mean, I've occasionally had the perception, it's quite inspiring, and I'm not sure if it's right, that actually, yes, my destiny is up to me. And in one sense, we can actually attain whatever we want, but there is a caveat here, providing Krishna sanctions it. Yes. So, are we limiting ourselves by saying that we can't do it? Or do we do that as devotees sometimes? Say that actually I can't really do that because of my karma, or I'm so fallen, or whatever. Or is this humility? Or to quote the words of Hamlet, has conscience made cowards of us all? So interesting questions about how much we can actually achieve here. Srila Prabhupada, interestingly, was certainly very bold about spreading Krishna consciousness. His ideas were not limited. I'm going to leave some time for questions because I'm sure you have some. On the other hand, there are certain behaviorists, particularly. Particularly the psychologist B.F. Skinner, he's a well-known psychologist, who denies that actually human beings have any kind of agency whatsoever. He's a psychologist, but he says that it's all the inner workings are not of the mind are not important. All we have to do is look at the behavior to work out what's going on. So basically, there's a whole. Actually, doing some research for this class, I came across a website or two, and there's a whole kind of debate going on. Not only debates, but there's a whole kind of almost preaching going on by the humanists and the secularists. Some of them are neuroscientists who are actually saying free choice is an illusion. We have no free choice. At the same time, they're propounding a morality. And particularly popular these days is the morality without religion. It's a big question. Yeah? But they're saying, taking it further, there is morality without free choice. Interestingly, they're claiming to be rationalists. That is, they're putting emphasis on being rational and logical. And by the way, we should be the same if we don't want to play into their hands, because they are opposing religion which is not rational. And we need to be very careful about entering into those debates, lest we actually present ourselves as being non-rational. We are rational, we are logical, but logic is not the means of attaining the truth. Bhakti is the means. But if bhakti is the means, and if from bhakti comes jnana and vairagya, then unless we have knowledge, unless we have detachment, our devotional service is not very mature. We have to be logical. It's very interesting. But if you look at some of the arguments, they're very poor, actually. We need to look at those. So interesting what's going on there. So the questions are, what is the Gaudiya Vaishnava perspective on this, and how is this relevant to us? I'll run through this quickly. I mean, the great German philosopher Immanuel Kant suggested that without free choice, if there was no free choice, we would be forced, if we had integrity, to we'd be forced to accept the consequences. In other words, if you believe something, you have to accept the consequences of that. Once Mahatma Gandhi was proposed, let's make it illegal to gamble. And someone objected, but we'll lose all the revenue. We're getting a lot of government revenue from gambling. He said, so be it. We don't get the revenue, but my principle is no gambling. Accept the consequences. So we have to accept the consequences. Kant suggested that if there's no free will, then we have to give up all ideas of morality. We have to actually abandon our criminal justice system because no one's responsible. No one's responsible. It's in their genes. And so now we have a criminal gene, a gay gene. I prefer chocolate to strawberries gene. Really. It's moving towards determinism. Of course, I'll go through this quickly. There's another very important question on free will, and that's more theological, and it's based on the causes of liberation. I'll read some of this. Most vociferously around the poles of God's mercy versus our own endeavor. This is a polemic that has bifurcated the Sri Sampradaya, in which Ramanuja appeared. He was the Acharya, not the founder, but the main Acharya. And there are two schools in the Sri Sampradaya. Kripamoya Prabhu knows a lot about this if you want more information. He's expert on this. There's the cat school, the 10 galai, and the monkey camp, the Vadagalai. And we know that analogy that the cat is carried by the mother cat, the kitten is carried by the mother cat, whereas the monkey has to hang on for dear life. Our own tradition actually tends to integrate both sides, as with the story of Garuda and the sparrow. I won't tell the story now, because we don't have time. It's interesting. This topic was central, by the way, to the Reformation, when the Protestants, as they were later called, broke away from the Catholic Church, in which the Protestant, or who weren't called that, but those who started the Reformation, there was a whole debate with Luther, Martin Luther, saying that actually it's faith, not works. And that's still prevalent. You cannot attain heaven through your works. It's simply by personal faith. We have some problems with that doctrine. We don't agree. And a later theologian of the Reformation was Calvin, who believed in predestination. That actually we have no choice. God's made up his mind, and some of us are going up, and some of us are going down. Tough luck. It's already made up. Interesting. Luther was responding to, this is just an interesting historical fact, to high-pressure selling. There was a lot of selling of indulgences to build St. Peter's Basilica. They had a whole theory that actually your sins can be removed by 3 ways. But first by confession, second by penance, and third, if you haven't cleared it all away, you go to purgatory. So they were selling indulgences. So if you paid a certain amount to buy a brick or something in the St. Peter's Basilica, you would be freed of that sin. But it was getting a little financially oriented. And they had one motto, and listen to this for an interesting sales pitch. As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory to heaven springs. Luther, it was getting really, they were getting a little motivated, we should say. I'm going to suggest quickly that our approach is based a lot on the 3 gunas. There's the concept of karma, destiny, but destiny can be changed. That's important to recognize. And also, in ignorance, there is no free choice. Animals have no free choice. In passion, we are aware of right and wrong and the consciousness of other living entities, though we tend to see a different living entity in different bodies. Yeah? And in goodness, one is largely free of impulses and addictions. There is a sense of freedom and happiness. Srila Prabhupada explains that more precisely in the in the relationship to Narada Muni, where it mentions that Narada Muni, it's the Bhagavatam, he was free to leave and wander wherever he wanted with his Veena. And Srila Prabhupada says here, without freedom, there is no execution of devotional service. This is interesting. The freedom surrendered to the Lord does not mean that the devotee becomes dependent in every respect. To surrender unto the Lord through the transparent medium of the spiritual master is to attain complete freedom of life. But he's suggesting, Mamai so jiva loka, we're parts of Krishna. Krishna is the cause of all causes. We also are agents. We cause our own misery and we cause our own happiness. Very important principle. Srila Prabhupada gave the analogy, if you're flying, like in the Battle of Britain in an aeroplane, while you're up there and you're fighting, there can be some contact between the different Spitfires or Hurricanes through the radio. But once you're shot down, you're on your own. So that's kind of entered into the ISKCON lexicon. There are many words that have kind of become entered into our lexicon. It's kind of fly your own aeroplane, Prabhu. The idea of flying your own aeroplane. An interesting one. I was going to move on to just a few ideas here connected with this. I've run short of time. I'm just going to actually run through a few points very quickly. We do have some agency. We have free choice. We also need to choose the mode of goodness as far as possible, according to our lifestyle. That's one thing I'd like to emphasize. We cannot become Krishna conscious if we're not, for example, clean. And this is a big challenge. I've seen places where the standards of cleanliness are atrocious, with prasadam kept in rooms that are 3 or 4 days old. Don't think that we can become Krishna conscious without first reaching the mode of goodness. You have to. It may not be that adopting the mode of goodness itself will bring us to that platform or to Krishna consciousness, but by the process of Krishna consciousness, we have to actually start developing the mode of goodness. Really. Don't think we can avoid that. And the other point I'm going to make is depending on Krishna doesn't mean complete passivity. I won't do anything until Krishna tells me. Taking responsibility sometimes means making some bold decisions. So this idea, I won't do very much until Krishna tells me, sometimes we have to make decisions. Arjuna had to fight. That means he had to make decisions. He also had to take some responsibility for his decisions. Fear of the results of our activities, and we may then sometimes not perform our duty. That is not applauded in the Gita. So we have to be bold in taking decisions. I'm also going to suggest that we need to take initiative. I've got a few reasons why occasionally we need to actually change the way we, individually and sometimes as a society, are practicing Krishna consciousness. I know this will not actually sit well with some of us because we have an as-it-is philosophy, which is well and good. But actually, I've got a few reasons. I can't share them all now, but I do want to just say that, give a few reasons. One reason is why we need to actually look at our philosophy and understand it well. And sometimes it may seem that we're trying to institute changes. One is that the words in Srila Prabhupada's books will change. If you've ever read Shakespeare or Chaucer, you'll know what I'm talking about. The meaning of the words will change. I'm not saying we don't keep the original translations, but there may need to be some acceptance that the meaning of the words are going to change. And anyone who can read Chaucer, please get back and understand it all. Do get back to me. I'd be interested to hear from you. Also, the context in which we practice Krishna consciousness changes. We're no longer in the 1960s and 1970s. We grew up in a very anti-establishment era. Do we want to continue with that mood of being hippies? Is that relevant? The Lord demonstrates this, as Malati Prabhu explained on Thursday. He comes in different forms, yada yada hi dharmasya, just according to the context and the receptive abilities of the people to whom he is speaking to try and reestablish the principles of religion. He's aware of context, time, place, and circumstance. Very important. The other point I'm going to mention, just to finish off, is that truth is sometimes misappropriated. Lord Buddha came down to contest the notion that actually there should be a lot of animal slaughter based on the Vedic principles. So he rejected the Vedas, an extreme measure, but the principle is there. We can actually misunderstand Shastra, and those misunderstandings can become embedded in our own lives and our own mind, and sometimes societally as well. Therefore, there needs to be some initiative taken in thinking about how we spread Krishna consciousness and whether or not we are spreading in a way that is consistent with our theology and whether we have that right understanding. We have to exercise great initiative, those of us who are leaders. And we're all leaders in some capacity. We may be educational leaders, we may be administrative leaders, we may be housewives. And those three examples are used in the purport of verse 214. leadership is many layered, if you like. If we're going to be leaders, and we need to be leaders in society to reflect the compassion of Lord Chaitanya and the Lord Krishna, we have to be leaders. We have to exercise some initiative. At the same time, we have to recognize that we are dependent on the mercy of the Supreme Lord. That is a little bit of a juggling act. But don't think that actually we have to be passive, that Krishna will automatically tell us. Sometimes we have to take risks. We have to be courageous to go and preach. Those who do book distribution know that. Thank you. Hare Krishna.